In the previous example, we looked at local storage, which was basically duplicating cookies, the new name for cookies in HTML5. The problem with local storage is that you can only store simple data, just lines of text, basically strings. However, to build true web applications, and that's something you want with HTML5 to make this standard more competitive, you need to store complex data. And complex data, we mean data that's more like that used in a database, relational data, and so forth. So this lecture is about storing complex data on the client in the web browser. This data persists. That means it's still there after you've closed the web browser. And you can create a much more complex web applications using these techniques. The problem for this course is that it requires quite a bit of JavaScript. So just sit back and look at this. There are two competing standards. This is explained in the course, but I'll explain it here orally. That the original standard presented for HTML5 was WebSQL. That's the first one I'm going to show here. It's the code you see on the screen in front of you, a little bit of it. And WebSQL basically mimics the SQL, the structured query language that you use to talk to databases. And so it creates a JavaScript API to talk with databases with that. That standard was dropped, and you're going to see when I show an example, the example works, but the check made by Modernizer, this code we have right here, to check and see if it's supported by web browser, says it's not. So technically it's not supported, but in practice it still is. So it still is going to work. The new standard is something called indexed DB. That standard is not built on SQL. It's more of tables. It's supposed to be much faster, but the syntax and appearance is in JavaScript is a little more strange and harder to grasp, maybe would be a good way to put it if you're used to working with SQL databases. So we basically have two competing technologies, and the support varies a little bit between web browsers. But for the purpose of this course, it's good to know that there are two ways to store complex data. You have WebSQL, you have IndexedDB. WebSQL is the previous standard, and IndexedDB is the coming standard. The problem with IndexedDB is that the standard is currently changing quite a bit. So I believe my example I found didn't actually work correctly. There were a few errors. So they keep changing the standards. You have to go in and change your code and so forth. But just sit back, look at this. I'll talk it through rather quickly, but you can see how it works and see the possibilities with this technology. So as I said, the example in front of us is the WebSQL. I'm going to show how it works first, and here we are, and you see when I refresh the page, it says your browser does not support WebSQL. And all this is a simple thing to store information about what we want to eat, like a grocery list, basically. Let's say we need to buy some beer. It's always nice to have, right? And as you can see, I've already tested this a few times. So I'd already added fish and milk and cheese, and these were saved. My computer's been off and so forth. So these were saved in the browser, even when the session was closed. And so you can basically, and you can create a little application here that we can take away a few of these. All of this is using JavaScript and HTML5, and I can add more things. Oh, we did need cheese. Add those. We need some eggs, and we need some juice. And we need some bread. So we add some. Oops. Add some things. And as you can see, I can refresh the page, and then if I just add something, they're all still there. So you get the basic idea. And of course we can make this data even more complex. I'm saving it because how it's different is that when we had local storage, we were going to save something and then find out which item we wanted to delete and so forth. It's much harder, but here we can save them. You can give them primary keys and all the things you usually do with databases to work with data in a more complex way. So I'll quickly run through the code here. As you can see, the majority of the code is in the script tag. So it's basically a bunch of JavaScript. The HTML that we saw is just the two inputs in the page, in a list, in a div tag. And that's where we're going to put everything. And to do it, basically, we create variables. We create a database. We call grocery list DB. And then we use JavaScript to talk to this local database. And we create a table, create table. I'm assuming you're not familiar with SQL, but this language you see inside the quotation marks that it's in pink in this text editor. These are SQL statements that we're sending to the database. Insert into, that's when I add things to my grocery list. I give it the ID and a text, and the ID is what I use to find each specific item. I have a function to show all, where that's when I list all the items when we add. And basically what I'm doing is adding HTML. I'm creating HTML, so I stick in items in the list. Delete grocery item, I just delete from grocery list, and so forth. So as you can see, especially when I show briefly the next example, this code is rather straightforward. You have a function to add groceries, you have a function to show all the groceries, and then you have a function to delete an item in the grocery, and a bunch of JavaScript. If we go to the second one, as I stated, IndexedDB, the competing or the new way to do this, it says your browser supports it, and I had just tested this previously, but it doesn't work. And I found that I went through it and debugged, and there was a little change in the code they had made. So I thought that would be useful. The example doesn't need to work. It basically works the exact same way as the previous. I had just implemented it with IndexedDB, but we want to see the code. And we're going to see here that the code is much different. We're just testing to see if it's supported. And then we create a IndexedDB database in this code here. And then we set a variety of events. And then deleting things here, adding, and they're all tables. And we do transactions on this thing. As you can see, the code in JavaScript, even if you are or not familiar with the code, is much more complex compared to using WebSQL. Get all grocery items, delete grocery items, and we're basically passing functions in JavaScript to these. It gives you a way to work a more object-oriented or prototype-oriented in JavaScript, but it becomes more complex. There you have it. Look to these examples. If you're familiar with JavaScript, as well as HTML5, then absolutely test these. Otherwise, just familiarize yourself with the concepts about storing complex data.